The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. Joseph Campbell. Growth does not happen in safe spaces. It happens in the exact environments you have been trying to avoid. In the pressure you cannot escape, in the choices that cost you something, in the moments where staying the same becomes more painful than changing. And if you are waiting for development to feel comfortable, you are waiting for something that was never designed to arrive. The myth of safe transformation. There is a widespread belief that growth should be gentle. That transformation should feel like expansion, not rupture. That becoming who you are meant to be should be a process of gradual, comfortable unfolding where nothing is ever truly at stake. But that belief does not match the mechanics of how anything actually develops. A seed does not become a tree by staying protected. It becomes a tree by breaking open, by splitting its protective shell and forcing its way through soil, stone, and darkness toward a light it cannot yet see. The breaking is not incidental to the growth. The breaking is the mechanism of growth. A caterpillar does not become a butterfly by remaining safe inside the cocoon. It becomes a butterfly by dissolving completely. Its entire structure liquefies. Every cell, every system, every recognizable part of what it was breaks down into formless matter before reorganizing into something entirely different. There is no safety in that process. There is only risk, total risk. The risk that the reorganization will not complete, that the transformation will fail, that what emerges will not be viable. And yet the system requires it, because becoming something new is not an addition to what you already are. It is a reorganization of your entire structure. And reorganization requires disassembly. You cannot hold on to what you were and become what you are capable of being. The two states are incompatible, and the transition between them is not a bridge, it is a gap, a space where you are no longer one thing and not yet the other, where your old coherence has dissolved and your new coherence has not yet stabilized. That gap is where growth happens, and it is terrifying by design. Risk is not optional. Most people treat risk as something to minimize, as something to manage, mitigate, or avoid entirely. And in certain contexts, that makes sense. You do not take unnecessary risks with your physical safety. You do not gamble with resources you cannot afford to lose. You do not invite chaos just to prove you can survive it. But developmental risk is different. Developmental risk is not something you can avoid without cost. It is the condition under which character is formed, capacity is expanded, and coherence is deepened. And the cost of avoiding it is stagnation. Stagnation is not neutral. It is not simply staying the same. It is the slow accumulation of tension between who you are and who you are capable of becoming. It is the friction of living inside a structure that no longer fits. It is the pressure of suppressing the parts of yourself that need to emerge in order to keep the parts of yourself that feel familiar. And that pressure does not disappear. It compounds. It becomes background noise. It turns into chronic dissatisfaction, low-grade anxiety, the persistent sense that something is wrong, but you cannot name it. You are not depressed. You are not broken. You are compressed. And compression is what happens when growth is blocked, but the developmental force does not stop pushing. The system you are inside does not let you stay still. It only lets you choose between two forms of discomfort. The discomfort of growth, or the discomfort of resisting growth. One is acute and time-limited, the other is chronic and indefinite. And most people, without realizing it, choose the chronic discomfort because it feels more manageable in the short term. But over time, the cost of that choice becomes unbearable. And when it does, you are faced with the same decision you were trying to avoid. Except now, the stakes are higher, the pressure is greater, and the gap you need to cross is wider because you delayed the crossing for so long. Think about someone who stays in a relationship they have outgrown, not because the relationship is abusive, not because it is harmful, but because it no longer challenges them. It no longer produces friction. It has become comfortable in the way that stagnant water is comfortable. Still, predictable, safe. They know they need to leave. They feel the tension. They recognize that staying is preventing them from becoming who they are capable of being. But the cost of leaving feels too high. The disruption, the uncertainty, the loss of the familiar. So they stay, and they tell themselves they are being responsible, being mature, being realistic about the costs of change. But what they are actually doing is choosing chronic compression over acute transformation. And that compression shows up everywhere, in the way they move through the world, in the quality of their presence, in the quiet erosion of their vitality. They are not fully alive because they are not fully committed. They are not fully committed because they are afraid of the cost. And the irony is that the cost they are avoiding by staying is smaller than the cost they are accruing through delay. Because the developmental force does not stop pushing, it just redirects into frustration, into resentment, into the slow decay of coherence that happens when you know what you need to do and refuse to do it. This is not judgment. This is mechanics. The system reflects the consequences of avoidance with perfect accuracy. And those consequences are not abstract. They are biological, psychological, relational. You can feel them in your body, in the tightness that does not release, in the fatigue that does not resolve with rest, in the sense that you are living someone else's life even though no one forced you into it. That is the cost of refusing developmental risk, not punishment, not failure, but the slow suffocation of living inside a structure that no longer has room for who you are becoming. The pressure is structural. Here is what most people misunderstand about developmental pressure. It is not personal. It is not punishment. It is not the universe singling you out for difficulty. It is the structural reality of being inside a system designed to produce growth under constraint. Constraint is not a bug. Constraint is the condition that forces specificity. If you had infinite time, infinite resources, infinite space to experiment, you would never commit to a direction. You would never make a choice that costs you something. You would never develop the capacity to prioritize, to sacrifice, to focus. You would remain diffuse, unfocused, incapable of depth. Constraint forces you to choose, to commit, to invest in one path, knowing that choosing it means not choosing something else. And that act of choosing under constraint, that willingness to accept the cost of commitment, is what develops character. Think about the most significant growth you have experienced in your life. The moments where you became someone different than you were before, not just smarter, not just more skilled, but structurally changed, more coherent, more integrated, more capable of navigating complexity. Did any of those moments happen in comfort? Did any of them happen when everything was easy, when the stakes were low, when you had all the time and resources you needed to figure it out without risk? Or did they happen in the exact opposite conditions? When you were under pressure? When the cost of failure was real? When you had to make decisions with incomplete information? When you were forced to commit before you felt ready? When the only way forward required you to risk something you were not sure you could afford to lose? That is not coincidence. That is the design. Growth does not happen in the absence of pressure. It happens because of pressure. Pressure is the force that reveals what you are made of. That tests the integrity of your structure. That exposes the gaps between what you think you are capable of and what you are actually capable of. And the system does not protect you from that pressure. It applies it relentlessly, not to break you, but to show you where you are not yet coherent, where your structure is still fragile, where your capacity has not yet developed. The cost is real. When people talk about growth, they often speak in metaphors, as if the cost is symbolic, as if what you are risking is abstract. But the cost of becoming is not abstract. It is concrete. It is measurable. It is felt. You risk relationships, real ones, relationships that matter, because the person you are becoming may not be compatible with the dynamics you built when you were someone else. And some people will not make the transition with you. They will resist your growth. They will try to pull you back into the shape they recognize. And if you continue growing, you will lose them. Not because you want to, but because coherence with yourself and coherence with them have become mutually exclusive. You risk identity, the version of yourself you have spent years constructing, the story you tell about who you are, the roles you have occupied, the labels you have worn. Growth requires you to dismantle that story, to admit that the identity you built was functional for a previous stage, but is now a constraint. And letting go of that identity, even when you know it no longer fits, feels like dying. Because part of you is dying, the part that needed to be that person in order to survive the conditions you were in. You risk certainty, the comfort of knowing how things work, of having a stable framework, of being able to predict outcomes. Growth moves you into territory where the old rules no longer apply, where your previous strategies no longer work, where you have to make decisions without the reference points you have always relied on. And that uncertainty, that loss of stable ground, is destabilizing. It is supposed to be, because destabilization is the precondition for reorganization. You risk failure, real failure, not the kind of failure that teaches you a lesson and then you move on. The kind of failure that costs you something you cannot get back. That changes the trajectory of your life. That closes doors permanently. That exposes you to loss, humiliation, regret. The system does not guarantee success. It only guarantees that if you risk nothing, you develop nothing. These are not theoretical costs. They are actual costs. And the system does not reimburse you. It does not undo the damage. It does not make it fair. It simply reflects the consequences of your choices with perfect accuracy and leaves you to integrate the results. Becoming requires breaking. There is a reason the word breakthrough contains the word break. You do not break through by going around. You do not break through by finding a gentler path. You break through by applying force to the exact place that has been resisting, by pressing into the constraint until something gives. And what gives is usually you, not your body, not your mind, but the structure you built to protect yourself from the very pressure you need in order to grow. Think about the psychological defenses you carry, the ways you avoid discomfort, the strategies you use to prevent yourself from feeling the full weight of consequence, the narratives you tell yourself to justify staying in patterns that no longer serve you. Those defenses were not randomly assembled. They were built for a reason. They protected you. They kept you functional. They allowed you to survive conditions that would have fractured you if you had faced them directly. But survival strategies are not growth strategies. What keeps you alive in one stage becomes the thing that prevents you from advancing to the next. And at some point, you have to make a choice. You can keep the defense, or you can keep growing. You cannot do both. Breaking through means dismantling the defense, allowing yourself to feel the discomfort you have been avoiding, facing the fear you have been running from, making the choice you have been postponing. And that act of breaking, that willingness to let the protective structure collapse, is what allows the new structure to form. You do not become something new by adding to what you already are. You become something new by letting go of what you have been holding on to. And letting go, truly letting go, is not gentle. It is violent, not in the sense of harm, but in the sense of force, the force required to overcome the inertia of staying the same. The body knows the cost. Your nervous system understands developmental risk in ways your mind does not. It knows at a biological level that growth is dangerous, that change is destabilizing, that the gap between who you are and who you are becoming is a space of vulnerability where predation, failure, and collapse are all possible. And so, When you approach the edge of growth, when you are about to make a choice that will fundamentally change you, your body resists. Not because it is broken, but because it is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It is trying to keep you alive. And from the perspective of your nervous system, staying alive means staying the same. This is why growth feels like fear. Why the choice to step into the unknown activates the same physiological response as encountering a threat. Your heart rate increases, your breathing shallows, your muscles tense, your system mobilizes for danger, because it perceives change as danger. And in a purely biological sense, it is not wrong. Change is dangerous. Growth is risky. Becoming something new means leaving the safety of what you know and entering a space where you do not yet have the skills, the resources, or the coherence to guarantee your survival. Your nervous system reads that as threat, and it does everything in its power to stop you. But here is the paradox. The only way to become safe is to risk safety. The only way to develop the capacity to navigate complexity is to enter complexity before you feel ready. The only way to build the structure that allows you to handle pressure is to expose yourself to pressure before the structure is fully formed. You cannot wait until you are ready, because readiness is not a prerequisite for growth. Readiness is the result of growth, and growth only happens when you move before you feel ready. This is the cost, not just the external risks, but the internal resistance, the biological imperative to stay the same, fighting against the developmental imperative to change. And the only way through is to feel the fear, recognize it as the nervous system doing its job, and choose growth anyway. Not because it feels safe, but because staying the same has become unbearable. The timing is not negotiable. There is a window for every developmental transition, a period where the pressure is high enough to force movement, but not so high that it becomes crushing, where the cost of staying the same has exceeded the cost of changing, but the resources required to make the change are still available. That window does not stay open indefinitely. If you delay too long, if you resist the transition past the point where it is optimal, the conditions change. The pressure increases, the cost compounds, the gap between where you are and where you need to be widens, and eventually, the transition that could have been manageable becomes catastrophic. This is why crisis often precedes growth, not because crisis is required, but because crisis is what happens when you ignore the earlier signals, when you suppress the discomfort, when you avoid the choices, when you delay the braking until the system forces it. The system will let you delay, it will let you avoid, it will let you suppress, but it will not stop applying pressure. And the longer you resist, the more force is required to move you, until the force becomes so great that the transition happens whether you are ready or not. And when it happens that way, it is not controlled. It is not chosen. It is collapse. And collapse is far more costly than voluntary growth. This is not a threat. This is a description of how developmental systems work. You can choose to grow before the pressure becomes unbearable, or you can wait until the pressure exceeds your capacity to resist. Either way, the growth will happen. The only question is whether you participate in it consciously, or whether you are dragged through it by force. The signals come early, long before the crisis. They come as restlessness, as dissatisfaction, as the quiet awareness that something is off even when everything appears functional, as the sense that you are capable of more, but are not allowing yourself to access it, as the friction between who you are and who you know you could be if you were willing to pay the cost. Most people ignore those signals. They interpret them as mood, as stress, as something that will pass if they just push through. And the signals do pass, not because the pressure resolved, but because the nervous system adapts. It stops sending the alarm. It accepts the compression as baseline, and the person continues functioning, unaware that they are slowly calcifying into a structure that can no longer accommodate growth. Then something breaks, a relationship ends, a job is lost. A health crisis forces a reckoning. And suddenly, the transition that could have been navigated gradually, intentionally, with some degree of control, becomes an emergency. The person is forced to change under the worst possible conditions. When their resources are depleted, when their support systems have eroded, when they are already destabilized and the additional pressure of transformation feels like it might finish them. But here is the thing. Even crisis-induced transformation works. Even forced growth produces development. The system does not care how you get there. It only cares that you get there. And if you refuse to move voluntarily, it will move you involuntarily. Not as punishment, but as necessity. Because the developmental trajectory is not optional. You either advance or you become irrelevant to the stages that require advancement. The cost of delayed growth is not just the suffering of the crisis. It is the time lost, the opportunities missed, the relationships that could have been preserved if the transition had happened sooner, the capacity that could have been built earlier and applied to challenges that you were forced to face without it. You cannot get that time back. You cannot undo the consequences of delay. You can only integrate what happened and commit to not making the same mistake the next time the window opens. The return on risk. Here is what makes the cost tolerable. The return. When you risk something real, when you step into the gap, when you allow the old structure to break and the new structure to form, what you gain is not just a new skill or a new perspective. What you gain is a new level of coherence, a deeper integration, a more stable foundation. You become someone who is capable of navigating the conditions that used to destabilize you. Someone who can hold tension without collapsing. Someone who can make decisions under ambiguity without fracturing. Someone who can absorb consequence without losing integrity. That capacity is not granted. It is earned. Through repetition, through exposure, through the accumulated experience of risking, failing, recalibrating, and risking again until the pattern becomes internalized. And once it is internalized, it does not go away. You do not lose the capacity you have built. You carry it forward. It becomes part of your structure, part of your baseline coherence. And the next time you face a similar challenge, you do not start from zero. You start from the level of capacity you developed the last time you took the risk. This is how development compounds. Each risk you take, each transition you navigate, each breaking and reorganization you survive, adds to your structural integrity. And over time, the accumulation of those transitions produces a being who is fundamentally different than the one who started. Not just in skill, not just in knowledge, but in coherence, in stability, in the capacity to remain integrated under conditions that would have shattered an earlier version of you. That is the return. Not comfort, not safety, but the kind of coherence that allows you to function in environments that require more than survival, that require presence, discernment, authority, the kind of coherence that makes you useful to the system in ways that undeveloped beings cannot be. And the system rewards that coherence, not with external validation, but with access to higher complexity, to greater responsibility, to roles that require the exact capacity you built by taking the risks you were afraid to take. The refusal to grow. There are beings who refuse, who look at the cost and decide it is too high, who choose to stay in the familiar structure even when it no longer fits, who prioritize safety over coherence, comfort over development, the known over the possible. The system does not punish them. It simply does not advance them. They remain functional. They remain alive. But they do not grow. They do not deepen. They do not develop the capacity required to navigate higher levels of complexity. And over time, the gap between their capacity and the demands of the environment increases until they are no longer able to participate in the environments that require the growth they refused. This is not cruelty. This is mechanics. The system advances beings who are willing to pay the cost of advancement. It does not advance beings who are not. And there is no judgment in that, no condemnation, just the structural reality that growth requires risk, and risk requires willingness, and willingness cannot be forced. You are free to refuse. You are free to stay where you are. You are free to prioritize comfort, safety, and the preservation of what you already know. The system will let you. It will not intervene. It will not drag you forward. It will simply continue offering you the conditions under which growth is possible, and it will wait to see what you choose, but it will not wait forever. The window closes. The opportunity passes. And when it does, the cost of entering the next stage increases. Not as punishment, but as a reflection of the reality that delayed growth requires more force, more pressure, more braking than timely growth. The choice you are facing. Right now, in your life, there is something you are avoiding. A transition you know you need to make, but have been postponing. A risk you know you need to take, but have been unwilling to commit to. A breaking you know is coming, but have been trying to prevent. You feel it, in the tension, in the restlessness, in the quiet, persistent awareness that the structure you are living inside no longer fits, that who you are is not aligned with who you are capable of becoming, that the cost of staying the same is starting to exceed the cost of changing. That feeling is not random. It is not anxiety. It is not a problem to solve or a symptom to medicate. It is the signal, the indication that you are at the edge of a developmental transition, that the pressure has reached the threshold where movement is possible, that the window is open, and you have a choice. You can step into the gap now while the transition is still manageable, while you still have some control over the process, while the cost is high but not catastrophic. Or you can delay, you can suppress the signal, you can avoid the choice, and you can wait until the pressure becomes so great that the transition happens whether you are ready or not. Either way, the transition will happen. The system does not let you stay still. It only lets you choose when and how the movement occurs. Pause. Right now. Feel where the tension is in your body, where you are holding the resistance, where the pressure has accumulated. That is not tension you need to release. That is tension you need to listen to, because it is telling you exactly where the growth is trying to happen, and the longer you resist it, the more force will be required to move you. You know what the choice is. You have known for a while. The knowing is not the problem. The willingness is the problem, and willingness is not something you wait to feel. Willingness is something you enact. You make the choice before you feel ready. You step into the gap before the fear subsides. You break the structure before you know what will replace it. That is the cost, and that is the only way through. Becoming is not optional. Here is the final piece, the one most people resist. Becoming is not optional, it is structural. You are inside a system designed to produce growth, and that system does not stop applying pressure just because you are uncomfortable. It does not pause the process just because you are not ready. It does not wait for you to feel safe. It applies the conditions, it creates the pressure, it opens the window, and then it reflects the consequences of your choices with perfect accuracy. If you choose growth, you pay the cost of growth. Risk, breaking, uncertainty, loss, and in return, you gain coherence, capacity, integration. You become someone who can navigate higher complexity, someone who can hold more tension, someone who is structurally equipped to participate in environments that require the exact capacity you built by taking the risks you were afraid to take. If you choose stagnation, you pay the cost of stagnation. Compression, chronic discomfort, the slow erosion of vitality, the persistent sense that you are living inside a structure that no longer fits. And in return, you gain nothing. You do not stay the same. You deteriorate. Because the system does not allow neutral states, you are either growing or decaying. and decay is what happens when the developmental force is blocked. The cost is real either way. The only difference is what you get in return. Growth is not comfortable. It was never designed to be. It is designed to be effective, to produce beings who are capable of functioning in high-pressure environments, who can make decisions under ambiguity, who can hold tension without collapsing, who can absorb consequence without losing integrity. And the only way to produce that kind of being is to expose them to the exact conditions that require those capacities. Before they feel ready, before they feel safe, before they know how it will turn out. That is the cost of becoming. And it is the only cost worth paying. This episode did not come to convince you. It came to place you. If something in you recognized this, not believed it, not agreed with it, but remembered, write "I awaken" in the comments. Not as a signal to others, as a signal to yourself. The hierarchy responds to readiness, and readiness is always internal.